I want you to take a listen, a little bit more of what Judge Millett had to say about the power of the presidency.
The problem here is that they are challenging implementation of the proclamation in a way that never gave anyone a chance to say, I'm not covered. And if your argument is we didn't have to do that, it's an intrusion on the president's war powers, the courts are paralyzed to do anything, then that's a misreading of precedent. It's a misreading of the text of the Alien Enemies Act. And that can't be an unlawful intrusion on the president's powers. It just can't. The president has to comply with the Constitution and laws like everybody else.
The president has to comply with the Constitution and laws just like everybody else. I think that was one of the top lines from today's hearing.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Everybody in America knows we're not at war with Venezuela. I was served on the Armed Services Committee for 12 years. I don't think the word Venezuela ever was uttered during my time, even in compartmentalized classified hearings. We are not at war with Venezuela. We have issues with Venezuela. We're not at war with Venezuela. There's a lot of off-ramps here. Are we at war with Venezuela? Were these people on this plane being directed by the Venezuelan government to invade our country? This is the kind of thing that the courts are talking about. And then most importantly, are the people on that plane even a member of this gang who've been instructed to do anything by anybody? And the idea that a president can just decide, okay, here's somebody who's from a different country. I think they're here because their government wanted them to come here and commit crimes, and I'm going to put them in prison for the rest of their life in another country, and they can't do anything about it. Is that America? Is that what we are as a country, really? Is that what MAGA really wants? A president to have that kind of power? Because you know what? That power can be used against anybody. It's a little bit like Trump saying he wants to go after lawyers and file frivolous lawsuits. Well, that's what the courts are there to decide, whether a lawsuit is frivolous, not Donald Trump. He doesn't get to decide. And the idea that checks and balances are going to happen here, I think they're overestimating their hand with the courts. I do believe the Supreme Court, I pray the Supreme Court will provide the backstop it should under the law and the precedent in this country. But I think people just need to stop for a minute and realize what they're doing. All of us want criminals who have come here illegally and committed crimes to be removed from the country. There are lawful ways to do that. That's all the courts would be asking of Donald Trump, is to follow the law.
Can you help me understand, Lisa, the argument that the government is making here?
I can try. The government is making an argument that the president's powers are at their apex when he is exercising national security and foreign policy authority, and that because he invoked the Alien Enemies Act in order to deport alleged members of Tren de Aragua, that is not a determination that any court, let alone Judge Boasberg, can second guess. That essentially they are completely outside the system of checks and balances because the Alien Enemies Act is part and parcel of his Article 2 powers to exercise the foreign policy of the United States of America. That really is the most simplistic form of their argument. But of course, Alicia, we know mistakes not only likely were made, we know now that mistakes were made. How do we know that? Because LegalLearn and his colleagues put in a filing this afternoon that include two declarations, one from a Venezuelan woman, one from a Nicaraguan man, both of whom say they were put on these flights. And when they got to El Salvador, the El Salvadoran government said, basically, you're not welcome in our custody because you aren't the people we were supposed to accept, both of whom then put back on flights and turned around. LegalLearn himself saying, I wish I knew how many people I represent. Why doesn't he? He represents a class of people who are part and parcel of that proclamation. But the government has never told any of us exactly how many of them there are, let alone where they were prior to having been boarded on these planes, how it is that they made the determinations that they're members of Tren de Aragua, and the rest.
Right. I mean, the entire thing, Jacob, is opaque by design. There was some incredible reporting in Time magazine about what happened to the 261 Venezuelans who were deported to El Salvador. I want to read you just a little bit of it. The intake began with slaps. One young man sobbed when a guard pushed him to the floor. He said, I'm not a gang member. I'm gay. I'm a barber. I believed him. But maybe it's only because he didn't look like what I had expected. He wasn't a tattooed monster. The men were pulled from the buses so fast the guards couldn't keep pace. Chained at their ankles and wrists, they stumbled and fell, some guards falling to the ground with them. With each fall came a kick, a slap, a shove. The guards grabbed necks and pushed bodies into the sides of the buses as they forced the detainees forward. There was no blood, but the violence had rhythm, like a theater of fear. Inside the intake room, a sea of trustees descended on the men with electric shavers, stripping heads of hair with haste. The guy who claimed to be a barber began to whimper, folding his hands in prayer as his hair fell. He was slapped. The man asked for his mother, then buried his face in his chained hands and cried as he was slapped again. Once again, Jacob, the cruelty is the point.
Yeah, these are human beings. And opaque by design is the language that you used. I think you couldn't be more right on. And I think a point that I want everybody to understand is it's not just happening in this situation in terms of immigration enforcement under the Trump administration to these Venezuelans. Last week alone, other backstops for other human beings with stories about their lives and their families and why they came to this country and why in many cases they were not members of gangs that were being accused of such were dismantled by this government. Watchdog agencies within the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, that pushed back against the family separation policy was dismantled. 2 ombudsman offices within the Department of Homeland Security that are there to push back on abuses of power by whatever administration is in place were canceled, closed. The ombudsman for unaccompanied migrant children within HHS was fired during the layoffs that we have all reported on weeks ago by the Trump administration. The backstops to protecting innocent people within this government are being dismantled by the government. They say in the name of efficiency. People sitting in that prison in El Salvador would tell you otherwise.